invite Bert Whitman up to the stage to introduce our speaker and start our program. Thank you.
All right, I'll be the next person in line to welcome all our Rotary members and our guests to what will be an enlightening and thought-provoking talk today by Arnold Panaro on the topic of this moment in national security. A special welcome again to the Honorable Sam Nunn, who not only was our senator for 24 years, but also was the first civilian boss of our speaker today. Arnold will tell you that much of his lifelong contribution to national security is attributable to the responsibilities which a young Senator Sam Nunn gave to a young former Marine off active duty, Arnold Panaro, the responsibilities placed in his hand that he's carried brilliantly through the last several decades. Let me introduce you to Arnold Panaro. The Lexington Institute publicly described Arnold as a Washington institution. I think I can prove it to you in just a few words here. This is in national security across all aspects, in military, policy, politics, government, business, academic world. He's made extraordinary contributions in all these, and I'll just rattle off a few of these. First, as a military member, he's a former U.S. Marine Corps commanding general. He and I commanded some of the same units. Started on active duty as a lieutenant in Vietnam right out of college, and at age 23 was severely wounded in combat, decorated for valor, and his life was saved by a young Marine. He's going to talk about that a little bit here. Second, as a government leader, Senator Nunn appointed him as the Senate the staff director of the United States Senate Armed Service Committee, where he served for several years, shaping major defense and intelligence policy legislation, and started there doing something he still does to this day, managing the civilian and military nominations for defense and security at the highest levels of government. Third, as an industry leader, concurrent with all his corporate executive roles, he's the chairman emeritus of the National Defense Industry Association, which is the largest defense and aerospace industry association, having served there previously as chair for two tours. Fourth, as a trusted advisor, both to major corporations, Fortune 5 and Fortune 500 companies on national security policy and defense policy, government relations, but also as a personal advisor. Arnold is unique in this. He has been the person who has prepared every single Secretary of Defense and other top national security folks for their confirmation hearings for the last several presidents, both Republican and Democrat. And he is asked for every time, including the last two administrations. I won't address those shenanigans, but you all might want to with some of your questions. He's got some good stories in there. Also academically, he's the author of 3 books. You can, I think, well, they're not up there, but 3 great books. We're going to show a slide on those books. You can buy them by clicking on a QR code. All the proceeds go to charity. They go to the Marine Corps Scholarship Foundation for the children of deceased service members. He's also a professor at national security, specifically national security decision-making at Georgetown University, and of greater interest to all of you at the University of Georgia, where he's teaching this semester right now, all the students. And he's also proof that he is bipartisan. He is chairman of the University of Georgia School of Public and International Affairs and a member of the board of Georgia Tech's Sam Nunn School of International Affairs. So everybody here should be happy with some aspect of Arnold. For these and other contributions, he's been recognized so many times. The couple that are just sort of very clear to anyone. Defense News has repeatedly named Arnold one of the 100 most influential figures in U.S. defense. And Lexington Institute, I mentioned earlier, the full quote is, Arnold Panaro is a Washington institution. Someday he will have a statue on the Washington Mall. That's what the CEO said. And she described him as a truly unique individual. And I have to say, I concur. So please join me now in welcoming to Rotary Atlanta this truly unique individual and national treasure, one of Georgia's own, Arnold Panaro. usual test. Are we working? Okay, all right. I'm going to plan to ask Arnold 7, maybe 8 questions on combat, government, strategy, the potential weaknesses that we have in national security, specifically look at human resources, and then threats, strengths, and opportunities. And then we'll have 15 minutes for members to ask him questions. Let me just start with combat. Arnold, you started your adult life right out of school in Vietnam, and that being wounded, serving with valor, and being saved by that young man, I know that's been an inspiration for you through your entire life of service in national security. Can you tell us about that and why that has remained so inspirational to you?
Well, Bert, first, thank you for inviting me here to such a distinguished group, an organization that does so much good, as one of your early speakers talked about, saving Head Start right now. And thank you for that overly generous introduction. And I know my colleagues that work with me with Senator Nunn that are here today, Rocky Reef, Julie Reith, Valeria McPhail, I can tell you without question about the Head Start thing. If Sam Nunn was still in the Senate and his colleague Saxby Chambliss was still in the Senate, there would be no government shutdown. Because they understand that the founding fathers set up the United States Senate for compromise, and you have to work together to get things done. And that was the hallmark of their service, one Democrat, one Republican in the United States Senate. So we need to get back to that. And you saw the compelling reason. No one wins in a shutdown, and we see what it's doing potentially. Thanks to you all, you've bailed out the Head Start program here for a period, but we've got to get the government reopened. There's so much damage being done to our national security right now that people don't really see. We're not training. We have a lot of things that are curtailed. But to answer your question, Bert, to answer your question, I graduated in '68. That was the peak year of the draft for the Vietnam War, very controversial, and just about everybody was getting drafted. My father had served with Patton in World War II in Europe, in the race across France to Germany with George Patton, and he said, Arnold, you don't want to get drafted because you'll end up going in the Army and you'll have to go fight in Vietnam, and war is hell, and nobody wins in a war. I took his advice to heart, so I volunteered and joined the Marine Corps, got to Vietnam quicker than I ever would have if I'd have been in the Army. Oops. And I was basically an infantry rifle platoon commander, as Bert mentioned, what we call in the military a grunt. And my whole mission, it was in the Quai Son Mountains of Vietnam. Our mission was to interdict the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was the trail the Chinese used coming from China through the north to the south to bring supplies to the Viet Cong and to the North Vietnamese army there. I suggested to my commanders, why don't we stop them up there before they get down here and we have to fight them? Oh, no, Lieutenant, we don't do that. So basically, when I'd been there a little over 5 months, on January 3rd, 1970, my platoon was in some intense firefights, and we came across what looked to be an enemy concentration. We captured some anti-aircraft guns, which you never saw in that part of the country. So our higher-ups figured there must be something going on. So the next day, January 4th, 1970, my platoon was ordered to basically push into the stronghold of the enemy concentration, figure out what was there, what was going on, and to see what we could do to prevent, further action. When they showed me the terrain that they wanted me to operate in, I knew it was a big mistake, because basically, those of you, our general that's here today from the Corps of Engineers, understand you want to be always on the high ground in the military, not the low ground. They had me going up a draw with high ground on either side. I figured, oh my God, we're going to go into an ambush. So I gave that advice to my higher headquarters. They didn't listen to me and said, move to contact. So what I did was what we normally didn't do in the triple canopy jungle. We always moved close together because you got lost. I spread the platoon out because I was very worried about being in an ambush. And sure enough, unfortunately, a little bit later, we were ambushed. My Navy corpsman medic got hit, and I went out to give him first aid. He was severely wounded and had to patch him up. And while I was patching him up, I got hit in the back, and the impact was so hard, it knocked me way down into a stream. It knocked my helmet off that was buckled, and it knocked my rifle out of my hand. And I'm thinking as I'm flying through the air, boy, I'm going to be doing a lot of paperwork for losing that rifle. But in any event, the big mistake I'd made, I thought the enemy was this to the left from the high ground there, but obviously I got hit in the back, so I yelled to my radio man new coordinates to put artillery where we thought the enemy was. I'm out in the middle of this stream where the sniper was trying to zero in on me and bullets whacking all around, and then a young Marine corporal, Corporal Roy Hammonds from Texas, came from he'd been in the Vietnam 12 and a half months and would be going home to his home in Texas in 2 weeks. He left a totally safe position to come out and help me, and unfortunately got between me and the sniper, and he got hit several times. I was able to pull both of us over to the bank and tried to give him first aid, but I was not able to save him, and he died in my arms. And surely if he had not come out and put himself between me and the sniper, those bullets would have waxed me out for sure, and I wouldn't be able to be here today. So every day, I thank Corporal Roy Hammonds for saving my life and for dedicating and sacrificing his life, as so many in the military have done for their colleagues before. And it brings a real intensity to your work every day, because you realize if it hadn't been for service above self, which is your motto, which Corporal Hammonds demonstrated that morning in the Khe Sanh Mountains of Vietnam, I wouldn't be here today. I have 12 grandkids. I've taken most of them down to the wall and let them etch his name, and I tell them, because I want them to learn, if it wasn't for Corporal Hammonds, you wouldn't be here, because I wouldn't be here. So God bless you, Semper Fidelis, Corporal Hammonds.
So Arnold, you have covered everything from tactical fights to grand national strategy. Let me turn now to strategy. Our country normally has a formal national security strategy and a standard framework for national security decision making, which is one of your areas of expertise. The current administration hasn't yet published its own security strategy, but it does seem to have its own approach on doing things. So quick thoughts from you, if you want to share them with our audience. What is our national strategy right now, to the extent you can discern it, since it's not published? And how is President Trump's unique approach to executing it working for this moment in national security?
Well, the most important thing is, when it comes to national security, you absolutely must start from strategy. And strategy is devolved from what are your national interests, what are your vital interests. When Senator Nunn took over as chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee in 1987, because the administrations up until that point had really focused more on the budget and the inputs, not on the output, he started by having hearings every year on strategy. Bring in the top military leaders, bring in experts. What should our strategy be? What are our vital interests? And what you've had is, over time, and that's where you start from, and really strategy should be threat-driven. It ought to be based on what are the threats as a nation that we face, not just militarily, but also economically and technologically. Look, we agree now that China is the pacing threat, and China's on the march militarily, economically, diplomatically, and technologically. China has more diplomatic posts around the world than we have. They're ahead of us in some key technologies that ought to worry us. But in the Eisenhower administration, the strategy was massive retaliation, because the Soviets had massive conventional forces, which we didn't have, so we had the nuclear deterrent. And the strategy evolved over time through Nixon and many of the people, and we came into the post-Cold War era. In the Armed Services Committee, we had a lot of hearings that Senator Nunn chaired with his ranking member, John Warner, to basically not break the force and basically stick to strategy. And we evolved in the Ash Carter, when he became a good friend of the committee's, worked with us over the years as Secretary of Defense. He identified the 5 major threats as China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and global terrorism. And that came from the Obama administration into your and my good friend, General Jim Mattis, somebody that Senator Nunn introduced to the Armed Services Committee when he was nominated by President Trump. He asked Sam Nunn and John Warner, 2 bipartisan supporters of a strong national defense, to introduce him to their old committee. Both had been chairman of the committee. Jim Mattis said, that's the right threats, and he designed the strategy at the time. China is the pacing threat. we've got to protect the homeland and subsequent. When the Biden administration came in, they really kept the basic premise of the Mattis strategy and the threats. Trump won also basically from Mattis. The Biden kept that. Now, we going into this administration, they've not yet published their national security strategy. That's really the White House document. That's the overarching document from which the national defense strategy by the Secretary of Defense will flow. I think you're going to find that when it comes to identification of the threat, we still agree that it's China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and global terrorism as the threats. I think what you're going to see when it comes out, and it should be published here in the very near future, a good colleague of ours, Bridge Colby, is the Undersecretary for Policy, and he's sort of leading the internal discussions on that. I think you're going to see them prioritize defense of the homeland. President Trump talked about that during the campaign. Defense of the homeland includes shutting the borders down, stopping the drug traffic, the Golden Dome, which will be a shield that will basically protect us against some of the new emerging threats, particularly ballistic missile threats, space-based threats. In 1983, President Reagan had the Strategic Defense Initiative, but we didn't have the technological ability at that time. We do have some of the technology today. China will still be the pacing threat, and they'll have it maybe a second. So I don't see a lot of fundamental changes coming from what really was started by General Jim Mattis and held up by the, yes, there'll be different priorities, and what we spend the money on is going to be a little different because defending the homeland, basically, and particularly the Golden Dome, it's going to be important but very expensive. So basically, I think the good news here is I think you're going to see some continuity in the strategy when it comes out, even though there'll be some different emphases from what it was, for a number of years. That's really the best thing for the country, so you don't kind of lurch this. But I think again, I learned it from the master, Senator Nunn, when nobody was focused on strategy, and every year we would start our hearing cycle for the defense and the appropriation with strategy, and that's where it ought to start.
That's great. Let me go from a strategy to what some analysts describe as weaknesses in our ability to execute even the current strategy or a similar one going forward. There are a number of things that analysts talk about. I'll hit 4 of them just to kind of get all of us in the room on the same page. And I'm going to ask you your thoughts about these. Are these weaknesses, and how can we overcome them? The first of the 4 I'll mention is that we currently spend 3% of our GDP on defense. And that's a big number, but comparatively, it's not a big number. We spent 10% of GDP to win the Cold War, and to win World War II, we spent almost half of our GDP. And obviously, we don't ever want to have to go there. So there are analysts who argue that we need to spend more, but no one's expecting that. We really can't afford to do it, and even the proposed increases by the Trump administration aren't that big. Secondly, our all-volunteer force is very expensive. It uses a disproportionate percentage of those expenditures for our people to afford the all-volunteer force. Third, our industrial capacity has declined. Just one example of that, China now has 40% of the world's shipbuilding capacity. Anybody guess how much we have in the United States? It's under 1%. It's going to take a while to recover. And then finally, our government process for innovating and purchasing and kind of clawing back on some of this stuff is very archaic and bureaucratic. Arnold's written about some of that. So Arnold, those and other things like that can be discouraging. Do you agree those are concerns? What can we do about that? How quickly do we need to fix those issues?
I would say, and I'll walk through some of the concerns, I would say the number one thing we should focus on at the national level when it comes to national security, we should be a lot more focused on output and not input. We should focus on what are we getting for the dollars we're spending as opposed to how much we're spending. And the reason is my second book, The Ever-Shrinking Fighting Force, we're spending in constant dollars, take inflation out, way more than the peak of the Reagan buildup, which was a great buildup. Senator Nunn and Senator Warner, we were all privileged to support that, and they built on programs that were put in place by the Ford and the Carter administration. It basically, we're spending more in constant dollars than the peak of the Reagan buildup, and the force is 50% smaller. We have 1 million less people on active duty, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, warfighting units, 50% smaller. And why is that? First of all, I would say we don't have, I personally have argued and have written, we need the ability to fight, deter. Deterrence is important. That's the number one factor. You want to have this output so that you deter your adversaries from ever starting a war. Like I mentioned at the outset, there's nothing, everybody says the generals, listen, the people that least like going to war are generals that have had commanding combat. And so you want to deter war. For your deterrence to work, you've got to have the capability. So you have to build the capability. It's got to be credible capability, and your adversaries have to believe you're going to use it. We need to deter China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, global terrorism. We need the ability to deter, and if deterrence fails, fight and win 2 major wars on a near simultaneous basis. We do not have that capacity today. Our industry does not have the ability to produce the material that we need to be able to support that strategy. Number 2 is, as you mentioned, the all-volunteer force. So Nixon, the draft was so unpopular, including McNamara's 100,000, where he drafted 100,000 people that had no business being in the military. I had several of them in my platoon. Nixon did away with the draft. We went to the all-volunteer force in 1973. It struggled, and frankly, it was going to go under. If it hadn't been for the Nunn-Warner benefits package at the end of the Carter administration to save the volunteer force, bring it into the 80s, we would have lost the volunteer force. We're never going to go back to the draft politically, but the all-volunteer force is extremely expensive. The average fully burdened cost of a soldier today is over $500,000, and the life cycle cost is even greater. We recruit from the 18 to 24-year-old cohort. Those are the people that we need to bring into the military. To have a great military, you need to recruit and retain the best people. You need to give them constant and realistic training, and our industry needs to give them technology so they're never in a fair fight. We're behind on the technology. The 18 to 24-year-olds are the same people that the universities are recruiting. Chick-fil-A, Starbucks, by the way, Chick-fil-A and Starbucks give educational benefits that used to be an advantage we had. In that 18 to 24 cohort, it's getting smaller, and 50% of the people in that are not either medically or mentally qualified for the military. And we have large overhead in the Department of Defense, these massive defense agencies. So while we're spending $1 trillion a year on defense, we are not getting the bang for the buck we should for the dollars we spend, and we've got to fix that. Now, the good news is I've seen with the Hill, with Senator Nunn, with the chairman and ranking of the Armed Services Committee, who, by the way, are extremely bipartisan. That's one of the few committees that still operates. Roger Wicker and Jack Reed in the Senate, and Mike Rogers and Adam Smith in the House. They have major reforms coming on the acquisition side. The administration with the business people that are in the Pentagon pushing our industry to basically build capacity. We don't have enough of the smart munitions that we need. So there's a lot of goodness that's getting ready to happen. It hasn't happened yet.
They're streamlining the processes.
Streamlining the processes. They're streamlining the federal acquisition regulations. They're reducing the regulatory burdens on our industry. So, but it's going to take a number of years for all that to catch on. And so what we've got to do is make sure we deter the bad guys while all those changes are happening. But today, we do not have the ability to implement our national security strategy.
Let me turn, maybe 2 more questions. But if you have quick answers, we'll see. Maybe one more. We'll see. Kathy, I'll defer to you.
I learned under Chairman Sam Nunn, there's no such thing as a quick answer.
Let me go to threats here. You talked about the 5 big international threats. There are some who look at internal threats, and this kind of pulls you into the political part of your world, Arnold. Admiral, just a few examples. Admiral Mullen says the biggest threat to our national security is our nation's growing debt, the national deficit. Admiral McCraven says the greatest threat to our national security is our poor primary and secondary education system and our failure to invest appropriately into that system. And third, Admiral Dennis Blair, former Director of National Intelligence, who was here on this stage last year, He said he believes the biggest threat to national security is the internal political divide that we have now that's really unprecedented in the last several decades. Are you concerned about those things? And any comments or wisdom about what we can do to fix that in Washington?
Well, again, I'll bring my dad up. He grew up in the Depression, fought with Patton in World War II, the greatest generation, and we were growing up, he would say, son, if your output exceeds your input, your upkeep will be your downfall. And we're in a situation today where interest on the debt, we have a $33 trillion debt. Interest on the debt is $970 billion, greater than the Defense Department budget for this year. We are paying more for the privilege of borrowing money from China than we are on our national defense. It's 14% of the budget. Of the $7 trillion we spend annually in the federal budget, only $1 trillion is discretionary, of which 50% is defense. The other $6 trillion are mandatories on entitlement. So we all know, and anyone that passed fourth grade arithmetic, and sometimes I say, does anybody know what the 3 hardest years of a Marine's life are? Fourth grade, but I did pass fourth grade arithmetic. And the bottom line is, we all know.
What do you mean by that?
To fix the deficit, you have to basically cut federal spending, both defense and both discretionary spending. You have to cut entitlements. Social Security and a lot of the military retirement were put in place when people died at age 60. Now people live to age 84. So you've got to have adjustments there. And God bless us, and I know this isn't going to be very popular, you cannot balance the budget unless you bring more revenues into the federal government. So those 3 things have to happen. But guess what? There's no political courage in either political party to take on any of those, so it's not happening. And so basically, we definitely, it's like rust on a bridge, a steel bridge. When is the bridge going to collapse and can't carry the weight? It's coming. And I would say, the other things you mentioned are worry beads as well. But I'd say the deficit is a huge problem for us.
Having gone through weaknesses and threats and other nasty things, Kathy's going to let me ask one more upbeat question. Strengths. I'm just going to rattle them off, and even, I don't know if you just give a thumbs up generally to this,
Yep.
It'd be encouraging, folks. This is the view that not only I have, but that a lot of smarter people than I who look at national security believes that despite all these concerns, we do have some enduring competitive advantages in our national security. I'll rattle off 6 of them. We still have the greatest military capability in the world. No longer the greatest capacity. China is bigger, but we know how to use it better. There's general consensus on that. Secondly, we are resolute in our insistence on civilian control of the military. We've never lost that, and let's hope we don't ever do it. We also have uniform leaders who are apolitical, nonpartisan, because they swear an oath to a constitution and not a person or a party or a religion. They are exceptional leaders, by and large, certainly with exceptions, and they try very hard and methodically to keep that up. The fifth goodness is the quality of the all-volunteer force, which is remarkable. Less than a quarter of young men and women even meet the basic standards of intellect and physical and character requirements to serve the military. And finally, the moral and ethical grounding. Again, they're exceptions, they make the news, but compared to other military forces in the world, ours are so ethically and morally grounded. Can you just give us a yes, that's correct, so we'll feel encouraged?
I'd say all of those are correct, and I would say with the privilege of teaching at the University of Georgia, with the privilege Senator Nunn has given to me to interface with the students in Georgia Tech, I'm very optimistic about the future approach. The young people coming up in the system today give me great hope, and they are very good, and a lot of them joined the military. And so I would say a lot of these problems, they've been around a long time, but as the youngsters push up through the system, I'm very optimistic about the future.
Good to hear. And I knew that was going to be the answer.
Students to come to the mic, please. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll take the bait.
Go for it.
Gentlemen, thank you for this presentation. I had a question about the elevation of Homeland Defense as one of the top strategic priorities. I currently serve as a MEPLO, a Marine Emergency Preparedness Liaison Officer for Region 4 here in the Southeast. And my job has to do with connecting DoD assets to local authorities. The Homeland Defense kind of inverts that to where Homeland authorities might be working in support of Department of Defense. I'm just curious about how you can see Homeland Defense elevating in the national strategic portfolio.
Well, it's a critically important part of our strategy and our response. I had the privilege of chairing the Independent Commission on the Guard and Reserve, and we recommended that DOD do more in the homeland. The Department of Defense supports the Department of Homeland Security. They're the lead for Homeland Defense. I had the head of the FEMA region serving on my board when I chaired the Secretary of Defense's Reserve Forces Policy Board. We owe it to the people of the United States with the taxes they pay to protect them here at home, to help them in floods and fires, and all those other kind of things. And when you look at it, they don't care who's doing it, whether it's active duty, Guard or Reserve, or Homeland Security. Our government needs to be able to work together and work towards a common mission, a common purpose. And that's the way it ought to work. DOD is not the lead, the Department of Homeland Security is, and we support them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you both for an excellent discussion. Quick question. There's been a lot of discussion, or I've heard some discussion over this past weekend around us starting nuclear testing again. And so the question is, how should we be thinking about that?
Well, our years in the Senate, Senator Nunn and I dealt with a nuclear freeze. We dealt with a nuclear test ban. We dealt with nuclear testing. Our technological experts at our nuclear weapons labs, Sandia, Livermore, all those places, believe that we can technologically model what we need to model so that we have a safe and secure nuclear deterrent. And that's the mission of the Department of Energy, National Nuclear Security Administration. The people that have gone in the Trump administration have already said our weapons are secure and safe. We never want to take that for granted. I personally don't think we're going to see the body politic, no matter what we've heard publicly, move very quickly to do either underground nuclear testing. For sure, we're not going to see above ground nuclear testing. The testing itself would do more damage than you would learn from it. So I think, by the way, even if our government decides we're going to do something like that, it takes years to get that ready. We're trying to keep, and Senator Nunn is the leader, the Nuclear Threat Initiative to reduce the proliferation of nuclear weapons around the world. My personal view would be, it would be a big mistake. We're trying to keep other countries, from testing and building nuclear weapons. For the United States to sort of step out and start doing that again. If I thought it was necessary to basically make sure that we had safe and secure nuclear weapons, that would be different. But I don't think that's really the case today.
Thank you.
Major General, I know you teach strategic decision-making at Georgia Tech in Georgia. I wish you did at Emory, where I teach.
Yep.
But I've always wondered, when is the time for a strategic decision versus when is the time for a tactical decision? What would lead to your thinking as you try to make those decisions?
I mean, I think that's a tough question to answer. I think that a strategic decision would be when a vital interest of the United States is at risk, and you would have to determine what is a vital interest. And that's very, very difficult to do. We don't have a lot of vital interest, and that develops a strategic thing. Tactical is day-to-day, nuts and bolts. Some of the things that we are seeing today are much more tactical than strategic. But if, our vital interest would be if all of a sudden China or France, now France won't do this, we don't think, we never know. My dad fought against the French, fought through France in World War II. He never thought they were respectful enough of what we did for them. So let's say a rogue state decides to send a nuclear ballistic missile our way. Iran is building intercontinental ballistic missiles. That's a vital interest to protect our homeland from a nuclear weapon going off in the United States. In lower Manhattan, you'd kill 1 million people just like that. So that's a vital interest. You also want to protect against rogue, nuclear states. So a lot of things there. So those would be vital interests.
Thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you so much. This really truly has been awesome. So let's thank our speakers today. Thank you. And thank you, Rotary members, for indulging me this afternoon and not talking when I asked you not to talk. Thank you very much. So, coming programs. Next week, we have 3 young military service members from Atlanta that will talk about their experiences in the service for Armed Forces Recognition Day. On November 17th, we have CEO of Rivian, R.J. Scaringe, and then there will be no meeting on November the 24th for the Thanksgiving holiday. I look forward to seeing you all next week. We are adjourned. Thank you.